There is a mystery carved in stone that silences even the most hardened skeptics, provided they dare to look the truth in the eye. We are conditioned to believe what is written in textbooks, that ancient masters armed only with primitive chisels and hammers created sculptures that we cannot replicate today, even with our most advanced technology. Before us stand marble figures wrapped in veils. The fabric looks so weightless, transparent, and flowing that it seems it would flutter at the slightest breeze. But this is not fabric. It is hard, cold marble. Official history insists on the version of manual labor, assuring us that thousands of years ago, or even in centuries closer to us, people possessed superhuman patience and precision, chipping away the excess from a block of stone. However, let's apply some elementary logic. Marble is a fragile and unforgiving material. One wrong move, one strike of the hammer too hard against the chisel, and the thin partition mimicking a fold of the veil would crumble into dust. Yet we see faces emerging through the stone. We see eyelashes, skin texture, and even the expression of the eyes, all hidden beneath a layer of rock processed to the thickness of an eggshell. Modern experiments attempting to recreate such masterpieces using lasers, CNC machines, and high-precision robots often end in failure. What is created today looks like a rough, lifeless, and clumsy imitation compared to the incredible elegance left to us as an inheritance. A paradoxical situation arises. The more our technology develops, the more primitive the art of stone processing becomes. Usually, progress works the other way around, from simple to complex. Here, we see clear degradation, as if knowledge was lost, or, more likely, the tools used to create this were of a completely different order. It is impossible to shake the thought that these sculptures were not carved in the traditional sense. Looking at the fluidity of the lines and the unthinkable detailing, one gets the impression that the marble was soft, like clay, or that these objects were created by a method resembling modern 3D printers, only far more advanced, capable of printing with stone at the molecular level. The images of the Vestals, priestesses of the goddess Vesta, are particularly mind-boggling. These sculptures convey not just form, but the very essence of matter, violating the laws of physics. A face covered by a veil is clearly visible, yet the sensation of a barrier remains. Official science offers us the fact that this is the result of genius polishing. But no master can explain how one can polish stone inside deep folds without damaging the overall structure. We are clearly not being told something, hiding the technologies of a civilization far superior to ours behind the term handcraft. To calm the public and shut down uncomfortable questions, historians often attribute the authorship of these impossible objects to specific people whose names are entered in encyclopedias. One such recognized genius is Raphael Monti, who is credited with creating the famous Veiled Ladies. We are told that he was the last to possess the secret of creating the illusion of transparent marble, and that he took this secret to the grave. It sounds romantic and tragic, perfect for a biographical novel. But one only has to open the dry facts of his biography and compare the dates, and the neat theory of the official version begins to fall apart at the seams, revealing a completely different picture. If you read Raphael Monti's biography carefully, it resembles a poorly directed spy novel rather than the life story of a great artist. Official historiography claims that this man was not just a sculptor capable of turning stone into silk, but also an active political figure. According to archival records, in 1847 he returned to Italy, where he joined the People's Party. And here begins the first serious contradiction. A sculptor, a man of art whose hands should be accustomed to chisels and clay, is suddenly entrusted with the post of one of the chief officers of the National Guard. Imagine the absurdity of the situation. In the midst of revolutionary events, when strategic thinking and military experience are required, Command is entrusted to an artist. Either historians are confused in their testimony, or this man was not who he is claimed to be, and his art was merely a cover for entirely different activities. The timeline becomes even more tangled when we try to match his military career with the creation dates of his most famous masterpieces. We are told that it was during his active participation in the Italian Revolution of 1847 to 1848 that Monti created his incredible sculptures. But for some reason, he did so in England. We get a physically impossible picture. While the sculptor is leading a rebellion and commanding troops in Italy, his works mystically materialize in London. Moreover, the Duke of Devonshire purchased the famous Vestal even before the official exhibition began. The deal took place in England while the author was on the barricades in Italy. This looks like teleportation, or implies that the name Monti was simply used as a brand to legalize artifacts that had a completely different origin. It seems there was a certain warehouse or source from which these masterpieces were extracted, and then authorship was assigned to characters convenient for the system. The official version tries to smooth the corners, stating that Monti was the last to possess the unique technique of creating the illusion of transparency, and that this secret died with him. But in the world of technology and crafts, knowledge rarely disappears without a trace if it is based on real skill. Usually, students surpass their teachers and methods improve. Here, we see a sharp break. There was a masterpiece, and then silence. None of his contemporaries, let alone followers, could repeat this trick with stone, despite all attempts to unravel the secret. Experts' explanations sound unconvincing and contradictory. Everyone puts forward their own version, but in practice, it is impossible to reproduce this with a chisel. This suggests that there was no manual labor in the usual sense at all. There are few options left to explain this phenomenon, and they all lead us away from the official version of history. The most probable seems to be the use of technologies that we would call 3D printing or complex geopolymer concrete casting today. If we assume that these sculptures were not carved from a solid block of rock, but created by layering or pouring into high-precision matrices, then the unthinkable detailing of the veil becomes understandable. Marble dust, mixed with a binder unknown to us, could take any form, hardening for eternity. Or we are dealing with the legacy of a civilization that possessed machines capable of processing hard rock as easily as we cut butter. These devices could be programmed to create perfect forms inaccessible to the human hand. Perhaps our world in the past was literally flooded with such products. They could have been part of everyday interiors, decor elements produced en masse on high-tech equipment. Then a certain catastrophe or shift of eras occurred, and new inhabitants, us, arrived in an already finished but empty world. We found surviving artifacts, brushed off the dust of centuries, and, not understanding the principles of their creation, simply appointed authors from among our contemporaries to fill the gaps in history. This version explains why masterpieces appeared out of nowhere, and why the secret of their manufacture was lost. You cannot lose what you never possessed. You can only forget how to turn on the machine that did it. However, if we accept the version that these objects were created not by a chisel but by high technology, the next logical and frightening question arises. Why has such a huge number of these perfect sculptures reached us in a mutilated form? Walking through museum halls, we constantly stumble upon statues without arms, without legs, and often without heads. We are told about time, about vandals, about bad transportation. But look closely at the nature of the damage. These are not random chips, not traces of a fall. The surfaces of the cuts often look suspiciously smooth or, conversely, intentionally knocked off in specific places. This looks more like targeted censorship, like the surgical removal of something important that these statues held in their hands, or that was depicted on their heads. The destruction of these details was clearly not an accident. It was part of a grand plan to hide the true purpose of these objects. When visiting the world's largest museums, be it the Louvre, the Hermitage, or the British Museum, it is impossible not to notice one frightening pattern which, upon closer examination, ceases to seem accidental. A huge number of antique statues, executed with incredible skill, appear before the viewer mutilated. We are used to seeing armless torsos and headless figures, perceiving this as the sad but inevitable stamp of time. Tour guides and history textbooks unanimously tell us about vandals, earthquakes, unsuccessful transport, and simply that marble is a fragile material and limbs are the most vulnerable parts of a sculpture. However, if we discard imposed stereotypes and look at these injuries from the point of view of forensics and engineering, a completely different, disturbing picture opens up. The nature of the injuries on many statues raises reasonable doubts about their natural origin. When a statue falls, it cracks chaotically, along the lines of least resistance of the material. But we often observe clean, almost surgical cuts, or breaks that look as if a specific detail was intentionally knocked off with a hammer, trying not to damage the rest of the figure. This looks more like intentional editing, censorship embodied in stone, than traces of destruction from time. A logical question arises. What exactly did these ancient heroes and gods hold in their hands? What was depicted on their heads in the form of helmets or diadems? If these were ordinary spears, swords, scrolls, or grapevines, why destroy them along with the hands and sometimes up to the shoulders? There is a bold but logical hypothesis capable of explaining this strange selectivity of destruction. Probably, these sculptures initially depicted not mythical characters with primitive weapons, but representatives of a highly developed civilization with technological devices in their hands. Imagine that an antique figure holds not a staff, but a complex control tool, a communication device, or a weapon whose principle of operation is incomprehensible to us. Such an artifact in the hands of an ancient Greek would instantly destroy the entire linear concept of history, according to which humanity developed from a digging stick to a smartphone. The presence of technogenic gadgets in deep antiquity would be irrefutable proof that we are not the pinnacle of evolution, but merely degraded descendants or newcomers on the ruins of a great era. That is why, perhaps, a massive campaign to cleanse history was launched. If an object cannot be separated from a stone hand without destroying the integrity of perception, it is easier to cut off the hand entirely. If a device resembling a headset or a neural interface is depicted on the head, it is easier to take off the head, leaving only the impeccably executed drapery of the clothing. This explains why the bodies of statues are often preserved perfectly, down to the folds of fabric and buttons, while the informative parts, faces and hands, are destroyed. We were left with aesthetics, but deprived of context, turning documentary monuments of the era into silent pieces of stone. Many researchers attribute a special role in this process of preserving and filtering information to the Vatican. It is known that in the mid-20th century, particularly in the 1950s, a large-scale reorganization of museum funds and archives was carried out. A huge number of artifacts were moved to closed storage facilities, accessible only to a few. There is a possibility that the final sorting took place then. Whole statues with inconvenient artifacts were hidden in the dungeons of the secret archives, where they are stored to this day, hidden from the eyes of the public. Safe copies or originals that underwent a strict amputation procedure of everything that could suggest high technologies of the past were sent to museums. Thus, armless and headless statues are not victims of time, but victims of an information war that has been waged against humanity for centuries. We are forbidden to see the true level of development of those who lived here before us. But if these artifacts were so dangerous to the official picture of the world that they had to be destroyed or hidden, then the scale of what is concealed is simply colossal. We see only the tip of the iceberg. shards of greatness that we were allowed to keep as decorations. However, if traces of technology were so carefully erased from the face of the Earth, destroying mechanisms and tools, then an even more terrible and global question arises. Where did the carriers of this knowledge vanish to? Where did the creators of this splendor go? And why did we take their place, having not the slightest idea how their world functioned? When we look away from the mutilated statues and look at the world more broadly, the puzzle begins to form an even more disturbing picture. Have you ever wondered why antique temples, aqueducts, and megalithic structures seem disproportionate to humans? Why are the doorways in ancient palaces and cathedrals designed for beings twice or even 3 times our height? This feeling of mismatch does not leave the attentive observer, generating a persistent feeling that we are living in someone else's house. We are like tenants who moved into a luxurious mansion left by the previous owners, and, unable to use the complex engineering of this place, started burning fires right on the parquet floor and boarding up the windows. This brings us to the so-called settlement theory, which states, humanity did not develop on this planet from scratch, but was placed in an already finished but abandoned world. To find confirmation of this hypothesis, it is not necessary to look for secret archives. It is enough to turn to one of the most famous texts, the Bible, but read it without the usual filters. The phrase from the book of Genesis, "The earth was without form and void," in original interpretations and more precise translations has a completely different shade of meaning. The word usually translated as void is more correctly read as laid waste or devastated. The difference is colossal. Void means that there was never anything there, a clean slate. Devastated unambiguously says that life once boiled here, cities stood, and gardens bloomed, but then something terrible happened that turned the blooming world into ruins. We did not come to an empty place, we came to ashes. Where did that highly developed civilization, which possessed technologies for plasticizing stone and free energy, disappear to? Here, logic offers us 3 main scenarios, and each is more terrifying than the last. The first option suggests that we ourselves are the culprits of their disappearance. Perhaps humanity, or the force behind us, arrived here from the outside with the goal of expansion. We could have acted as the aggressor who destroyed the indigenous population of the planet in a brutal war, after which we degraded ourselves, losing technologies but retaining vague memories of a golden age. This explains our innate tendency toward destruction and constant wars. We are the descendants of conquerors. The second scenario, no less sad, states that we were grown or settled here after the previous owners faded into oblivion. Perhaps they destroyed themselves in a technogenic catastrophe of planetary scale, or their time ran out naturally. In this case, we are a kind of experiment in resettlement, a new attempt at life on the ruins of the old. We were placed in a ready-made habitat, given minimal instructions that eventually turned into myths and religion, and left to survive among the remnants of greatness, which we, in our naivety, began to call wonders of the world. The third option, the most disturbing, forces us to think about the presence of a certain third force, a global moderator or cleaner. According to this version, civilizations on Earth change cyclically. Someone, or something, regularly conducts a cleanup of the territory when the development of a species reaches a dead end or becomes dangerous. The previous inhabitants were literally crushed into dust, leaving no stone unturned. And then, when the dust settled, a new cycle was launched. Us. And if this is so, a paranoid question arises. Have these observers left for good? Perhaps they are still here, right beside us, underground or in orbit, invisibly controlling the process and ready to press the reset button at any moment if we repeat the mistakes of our predecessors. Skeptics will invariably ask, if a war of such scale raged here or a global cleanup took place, where are the traces? Where are the craters from explosions? Where are the ruins of megacities? Where are the mountains of twisted metal? The answer to this question lies on the surface, but it is so massive that we simply refuse to perceive it. We look at the traces of the catastrophe every day, but our brain, protecting itself from the shocking truth, calls them natural landscapes. What we consider mountains, gorges, canyons, and even forests may actually be the ruins of giant structures, the melted skeletons of ancient mechanisms, and the petrified remains of biological life of completely different sizes. We only need to shift our focus, stop believing the fairy tale about millions of years of erosion, and the world around us will instantly transform, revealing the skeleton of a dead planet. Rethinking the surrounding world is a painful but necessary process if we want to get closer to understanding the true history of our planet. The most shocking blow to the habitual picture of the world is struck not by architecture or ancient texts, but by geology itself. We are used to looking at mountains as the result of chaotic tectonic shifts, volcanic eruptions, and millions of years of erosion. But what if some of these mountains have not a mineral but a biological origin? What if before us is not a pile of stones but the petrified remains of giant vegetation, the scale of which does not fit into the human mind? The main physical evidence in this case is the object known as Devil's Tower in the state of Wyoming. Official science, without batting an eye, offers us an explanation that, upon detailed examination, looks like a mockery of common sense. We are told that this colossal structure, rising almost 400 meters above the plain, was formed from molten magma. Allegedly, magma rose from the depths but did not spill out, instead freezing inside the volcano's vent, turning into perfect hexagonal columns. Scientists seriously claim that molten rock, cooling down, organized itself into a bundle of impeccably even geometric pillars that can be checked with a ruler. Anyone who has ever seen lava or concrete harden knows a liquid substance cracks chaotically when cooling. It forms shapeless masses, blobs, but by no means a strictly ordered crystal lattice hundreds of meters high. To imagine that a volcano works like a giant pastry syringe with a hexagonal nozzle, squeezing out perfect stone macaroni, is the height of science fiction. To understand the true nature of this object, one must turn away from geology textbooks and turn to biology and botany. Nature indeed builds its masterpieces using the hexagon, but it does so exclusively in living structures. Honeycombs, the compound eyes of insects, snowflakes, they all have a hexagonal shape because it is the most energy-efficient and strong configuration for organizing space. The hexagon is a marker of life, not the chaos of volcanic activity. If we take a microscope and look at a cross-section of the stem of ordinary flax or any other fibrous plant, we will see an astonishing picture. In the center of the stem are tightly packed hexagonal tubes through which nutrients circulate. This structure provides the plant with flexibility and strength. Now, mentally magnify this microscopic section millions of times and compare it with Devil's Tower. The resemblance is not just distant, it is absolute. The same bundles of hexagonal fibers, the same outer shell, which looks like crumbling rock on the mountain, but in reality resembles peeling bark or fascia. Stone cannot imitate the cellular structure of a plant with such frightening accuracy. What we see is not a magmatic intrusion. It is the petrified flesh of a giant organism that has undergone the process of mineralization, the replacement of carbon with silicon. We live in a world where the silicon era of life has been replaced by the carbon one. But the remains of past greatness still tower over us. Devil's Tower, the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, Cape Stolchati in the Kuril Islands. These are not quirks of volcanoes. These are stumps. Giant, petrified stumps of colossal trees that once covered our planet. This paradigm shift turns the familiar landscape into a graveyard of ancient flora. But the most terrible thing about this theory is not even that the mountains turned out to be trees. The horror lies in the mathematics. If we accept the fact that Devil's Tower is just a stump left after sawing, we can apply the proportions of ordinary trees to calculate the height of the original. The diameter of a stump usually makes up only a small fraction of the trunk's height. Even by the most modest calculations, if the base has a diameter of 300 meters, then the height of this tree must have reached from 6 to 20 kilometers. It pierced the clouds. Its crown covered entire regions with shade, creating its own atmosphere. It was a world of a completely different scale, a world of titanic vegetation. And here arises a question that makes the blood run cold. The stump of Devil's Tower has a flat, level top. This is not a break from the wind, not a trace of a fall. It is a cut. Someone, or something, sawed down this tree. To fell a forest tens of kilometers high requires tools and technologies of a planetary scale. Who was this lumberjack, and why was a biosphere of such a grandiose level destroyed? Scale is a relative concept, but it is the key to unraveling the most grandiose mysteries of our past. If we admit the existence of silicon vegetation, whose stumps we mistake for mountains today, then we must take the next logical step. Harmony of proportions exists in nature. In a forest where trees reach the stratosphere, ants the size of us cannot live. An ecosystem of such a giant scale implies the presence of corresponding fauna. If the height of ancient trees, judging by the diameter of stumps, like Devil's Tower or the Table Mountains of Venezuela, could reach from 60 to 100 kilometers, then the inhabitants of this world must have been giants. This is not science fiction, but biological expediency. Small stature in such a world would be an evolutionary dead end. Look at what remains of this greatness in the very recent past. Photographs from the late 19th century, taken in California and other corners of the world, show us the last survivors of that era: giant sequoias. In the pictures, tiny lumberjacks, looking like insects, pose proudly against the background of trunks whose diameter exceeds the size of a small house. To fell just one such tree with primitive saws took weeks of barbaric labor. These trees are merely pitiful shrubs compared to those silicon giants that were cut down earlier. But even they give an idea of what the world was like before the global shrinking of everything living began. We see the finale of the drama: dwarfs destroying the remnants of the world of giants to build their shacks from them. Accepting the fact of the existence of giants instantly solves one of the most painful problems of official history: the mystery of megalithic construction. Scientists have been breaking spears for centuries trying to explain how Egyptians, Incas, or the builders of Baalbek moved blocks weighing 100, 500, and even 1,000 tons. They tell us fairy tales about wooden rollers, wet sand, thousands of slaves with ropes, and leverage systems. But any engineer will tell you that a wooden roller under a weight of 800 tons will turn into splinters, and hemp ropes will snap. However, if we introduce a builder ranging from 20 to 40 meters tall into the equation, the problem disappears by itself. For a creature of this size, a multi-ton block of limestone or granite is not an immovable megalith, but a standard building brick. He doesn't need anti-gravity or alien cranes, he just needs muscles and a comfortable grip. The pyramids of Giza, the walls of Sacsayhuaman, polygonal masonry, all this looks like a miracle only from our Lilliputian perspective. For the true masters of that era, this was typical construction, erected according to the standards of their ergonomics. High doorways in ancient cathedrals and palaces, giant steps that a human has to climb. All this was designed not for greatness of spirit, but for the comfort of a body of a specific size. We find confirmation of this not only in logic, but also in documentary evidence, which historians bashfully call Symbolism. Look at ancient Egyptian frescoes and bas-reliefs. We see scenes where giants, exceeding them 3 to 4 times in size, stand next to figures of ordinary human height. Official science insists. The artist depicted the pharaoh large to emphasize his divine status and power. But why do we deny ancient masters realism? What if they drew literally what they saw with their own eyes? The coexistence of two biological species, humans and giants. This explains why the gods of antiquity were always described as beings of enormous stature and incredible strength. These were not mythical spirits, but quite material rulers, the elite of the past, who physically dominated humanity. Frescoes are not religious propaganda. They are a chronicle. We see giants holding animals that are large livestock to us in their hands like domestic cats. We see them managing processes inaccessible to the understanding of small humans scurrying at their feet. But giants left behind not only monumental structures that we are unable to repeat, and not only their portraits on temple walls. In the storerooms of museums and private collections, items are kept, the very existence of which puts a cross on traditional anthropology. These are things that are physically impossible for a person of our height to use, yet they are made with jewel-like precision and have clear signs of wear, indicating that they served their owners faithfully in everyday life. Among the many artifacts that do not fit into the official picture of the world, a special place is occupied by objects that are customarily called cultural oddities, although their true purpose lies in the plane of pure utilitarianism. We are talking about giant books, folios of such dimensions that an ordinary person cannot lift them, and the process of turning a single page requires the coordinated efforts of 2 or even 3 attendants. Ancient libraries and museum reserves hold tomes 1.5 to 2 meters high, weighing hundreds of kilograms. Traditional history rushes to explain their existence by banal megalomania. Allegedly, monks and scribes created such books solely to demonstrate the greatness of faith, or as expensive but useless gifts for kings. They try to convince us that this is souvenir production, not intended for reading. However, when analyzing the construction of these books, the souvenir version crumbles. These volumes bear traces of active use. Worn bindings, notes in the margins, greasy marks on the corners of pages. All this indicates that they were read, and read regularly. But who in their right mind could use a reference book or holy scripture that is impossible to hold in one's hands? For a person of our height, reading such a book turns into an absurd athletic marathon. But if we imagine a reader 4 or 5 meters tall, the proportions instantly fall into place. For such a creature, this giant folio is just a pocket reference, a convenient notebook that fits perfectly in the palm. The font, line spacing, paper density, all this is calculated for completely different ergonomics, for eyes and hands surpassing our parameters by many times. Perhaps these books are the remnants of the libraries of that very civilization, whose houses we call temples, and whose stumps we call mountains. They likely contain knowledge that could overturn our understanding of physics, medicine, and cosmogony. And here we return to the topic of the Vatican. It is this organization that has been accumulating all written evidence of the past for centuries, removing it from free circulation. It is believed that the Vatican's secret archives are tens of kilometers of underground shelving, storing not only Inquisition reports, but also genuine documents of the antediluvian era, including the Books of Giants. It is quite likely that a narrow circle of initiates has long studied these texts, and is perfectly aware of who actually built this world and what technologies were used. Knowledge is power, and no one intends to share such power with humanity, which is accustomed to considering itself the pinnacle of evolution. We are approaching the finale of our investigation, but this is not the end of the story, but merely an entry point into a new reality. All the facts we have examined, from marble veils created by unknown machines to sawed-down silicon forests and architecture for giants, speak of one thing: we are living on ruins. Our civilization is built on the bones and foundations of a world that was incomparably grander, more complex, and more technological than ours. We are like savages who found a broken smartphone and use it as a mirror, not even suspecting that it is a device for communication with the cosmos. We are proud that we invented the wheel and the steam engine, while beneath our feet lie the petrified schematics of devices capable of manipulating gravity and matter. Realizing this fact causes a feeling of deep discomfort, but at the same time, awe. The world around us ceases to be understandable and safe, as described in school textbooks. Every hill outside the window may turn out to be the ruins of an ancient fortress, buried by soil after a global cataclysm. Every strangely shaped rock may be part of a giant organism. Every antique statue in a museum is a silent witness to high technologies we have lost. The question now is not whether you believe in giants, in 3D printers of the past, or in a global cleanup. Facts exist regardless of our belief. The question is how you will live with this knowledge from now on. The next time you go outside, look at the horizon not as a familiar landscape, but as a grand archaeological site. Look closely at the old buildings in the centers of your cities, at their ground floors sunken underground, at their giant doors. Try to see through the imposed veil of the official version, the outlines of genuine reality. And perhaps, then the silent stones will begin to speak to you, revealing secrets that have been waiting for their hour for thousands of years. History is not finished. It is only just beginning to emerge through the erased memory of humanity.